Hey guys, so before we jump into today's video, I just want to let you know it's a bit of a long one. So if there's a certain part you're looking for in this video and you want to skip ahead, check out the description below so you can check out the timestamp and skip ahead to the information that you're most interested in. But now, let's get into it. Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name is Emma Lefebvre and today we're doing something I've never done before. Today we are doing a comparison video between 7 different 100% cotton cold press watercolor papers, all of the ones that I could basically get my hands on. So before we start, I just want to tell you my intentions and the purpose behind this video. I'm not here to tell you which paper is the best. I'm here to give my honest feedback and review of each paper so you can hopefully find one of these papers that works for you in your region. So because so many of you who watch my videos are in different parts of the world, different people are going to have different access to different types of papers for different prices. Whatever I pay for one of these papers in Canada is going to differ from what you may pay in Italy or the Philippines or the US. So I want to tell you guys what I honestly think of these papers, if you can find these in your region, if it's worth it for you to purchase or not. And the cost of all these papers are quite different everywhere. So what I also want to do is provide a couple of resources of where you can buy these papers the cheapest, only the few that I know. What I also want you to do to help each other out is to comment below of which papers you can find in your region for the cheapest price possible. I think we should be helping each other out here. For example, my absolute favorite Arches watercolor paper. Look how huge this pad is. A pad this big can go for over $40 at Michael's. I don't even think they carried them this big at Michael's, but it was like the 9x12 that they used to sell at Michael's in Ontario, Canada for $40. I would never buy at this price. But I was able to find this pad of paper, which is 11 by 16 inches for, I think it was $20 at a small art shop in Richmond Hill, Ontario. So what I need you guys to do is if you guys have any suggestions of where you can buy the papers that I'm showing you today for really cheap in your city, in your country, please let us know in the comments below so we can help each other out and save as much money as we can on paper. Because I know some of these can get quite pricey. The ones I have purchased off Amazon, because that's the only place I was able to find them, are a lot more expensive than I would have cared to spend in the first place. But for the purpose of this video, I did it anyway, and I'm gonna use it, so it's fine. But anyway, we're gonna jump right into the video and start comparing, so let's do it. Okay, so to start, I'm going to show you the actual pads of paper so you can kind of get all the specs and the visual of what they look like. So starting with the biggest pad I got, my Arches watercolor paper, which has been a personal favorite of mine for years. With that said, I haven't tried too many others, but it has always been my number one. So this comes in a pad, which means the sides are not glued down. You're going to see a couple of these guys. I have blocks. Arches does come in a block as well, but it is quite expensive and I've never splurged on that. I never found it necessary. Anyway, this is 11 by 16 inches. This has 12 sheets. It's cold press, 100% cotton, 140 pound, 300 GSM. Okay, so what I usually do when I get a big pad of paper like this, I will cut it down into quarters and work on quarters. So while it only has 12 sheets, I usually cut it down anyway. So this is the Arches, and I purchased this at a small store in Richmond Hill, Ontario for, I believe it was like $18.99, maybe $20. But I have seen Arches paper at Michael's, which was, I think it was $40, which is crazy expensive, which I never paid for there. Only if I got the 50% off coupon, which hasn't happened in a long time, so I never really purchased it there. But I know I was able to find this, not this big, at another art store called Curry's in Ontario. So if you can find this cheaper, please do, because it is cheaper in some places. You just have to dig. The next paper we are going to be looking at is Academy watercolor paper. This paper is from China. It is, I don't know how to say the name. the type of paper. Maybe you guys can help me out in the comments how it's pronounced. This is a block. So like Arches was a pad, this is a block. So it's all glued down on all the sides, so it's stretched. So when you paint on it, you leave it to dry and then take it off. It just kind of prevents it from warping. But what was cool about this paper is it came with this little leaf separator. Usually you have to use like a palette knife or scissors, which is not ideal because you could risk cutting the paper. And there's like a little opening at the top and you just stick this thing in there and then kind of open it up that way. This block comes with 20 sheets and it is 15 by 20 inches. And I purchased this from Amazon for $34. Which is a little bit expensive, but I've heard and seen, I've never done it myself, that you can get it from AliExpress, like in bulk, for a lot cheaper, and I think wish.com also has it. I've never ordered from them, but I know a couple people that have. Not sure if it's sketchy, but you can definitely find this a lot cheaper other places. The next paper we are going to be comparing it to is probably the most I spent on paper, which is kind of silly, but it might just be because it's not as accessible where I am. This is the Canson Heritage paper, so it's way different than Canson XL. It's 100% cotton, 300 GSM. This pad of paper is 10 by 14 inches, and it has 12 sheets, so it's another pad. I paid $47 for this on Amazon. I'm hoping you guys can find it cheaper. I think that's like absolutely ridiculous for a pad of paper, especially 12 sheets, and it's way more than Arches, which is surprising. We're gonna have to see the quality. I actually haven't used it yet, so we're gonna have to see how it performs, but that was pretty expensive, so we're gonna see if that's worth it. Again, if you can find this cheaper, please let me know where and let us know in the comments below. Okay, so the next paper we are comparing was actually gifted to me. This is Craftamo's new watercolor paper, and they sent it to me, but you can purchase it on their website for $32, or you can actually subscribe, and I think you can get it like either every 2 weeks or every month, or every 3 months, and it goes down in price the sooner that you kind of subscribe. So I think you can get it for as low as $19, like if you subscribe to every 2 weeks, which I don't know if I'd go through that much paper in 2 weeks, probably not. But yeah, so they gifted this to me. It is, again, 100% cotton. It is 300 GSM, size A4, which is 8 by 11. The next paper we are comparing is Paule Rubens. This one is 100% cotton. I have their sketchbooks. I've been using their small hot press sketchbooks for a while. It's also 100% cotton, and I love these. So they actually reached out to me and they sent me their 50% cotton paper. I asked if they had 100 and they didn't have it in stock in their facility. So I bought this one off Amazon for $31.99. Again, a little expensive. Haven't tested it out yet, so we're gonna have to see if it's worth it. It is another block. It has 20 sheets of paper in there. Again, 100% cotton, 300 GSM, cold press, all kind of the same. But yeah, so $31.99 on Amazon. My paper keeps getting smaller. Okay, so the next one we have is Stonehenge Aqua Cold Press Watercolor Paper. I tried this paper out years ago when Jenna Rainey was like selling little watercolor kits. Not this size, it was a bit bigger. This size is 7 by 7 inches. It's quite small. I was kind of surprised. And I remember when I tried it the first time a few years ago, I actually wasn't a huge fan. It's not as available in my region. I've never seen it in stores. On Amazon, it was $22 for this little pad, and it has 15 sheets. Again, it's a block. Blocks are typically more expensive in my opinion from what I've seen, but I don't know if I'd spend $22 on a 7 by 7 inch paper, but we will test it out and see how it kind of compares. Again, if this is more available to you, do what works for you. Its availability for me personally might not be worth it. And then lastly, we have Fabriano Artistico 100% cotton paper. Look how tiny this is. So this is the only place that I could find Fabriano paper. I found it at an art store in Canada called Desiree's. I couldn't find it anywhere else, and I know a lot of people love Fabriano paper. And the only ones that I could find in stores were like 25% cotton, maybe 50%. None were 100%. So this was the only 100% cotton paper I could find. I think they might have had loose sheets, but I didn't want to order loose sheets to be delivered to my house. I'd rather a pad. So this is what I got. This is only 5x7, so it's quite small. It is another block, and it has 25 sheets. So there's more, but it's really small. So we're going to see how it compares to this. Also, this was $18.99. So $18.99 for a 5x7 block. Okay. So I'm going to try and put all the stats kind of up when we're comparing them so you guys can kind of see. Again, just because I paid these prices does not mean it's going to be the same price for you, depending on where you live. So just keep that in mind. I'm not necessarily looking at what's the most expensive because I feel like I could have found some of these a bit cheaper other places I just didn't have access to at the moment. So let's actually get into painting and comparing them. Okay, so the things that I'm going to be looking for while testing out each paper is how well the paper absorbs the paint and water. Does the paint just sit on top or does it immediately absorb? How long it stays wet? The vibrancy of the color once laid down, because with some cheaper papers, you'll notice right away the colors are not as vibrant. The smoothness of the texture in paper. Some people like it, some people don't. I'm the type of person that doesn't really like to see a lot of texture in my paper. Not to say that it doesn't have it, but when you can see like quite a vivid like pattern underneath, I'm not the biggest fan of that. Another thing I'm looking for is its lifting ability. So how well can it correct mistakes? So if you were to lay down a leaf and dab it with your paper towel, is it going to lift easily or not? And then the overall kind of like, do I like it? So just a little disclaimer, this is my opinion, what I like to use watercolor paper for. I feel like every artist has a different preference, a different opinion, and that's totally okay. So what I look for may not necessarily be what you look for in your paper, and that's totally cool. Doesn't mean I'm right, doesn't mean I'm wrong. It's just my opinion, and I'm just here to share that with you. Okay, so immediately looking at the sheets, you can definitely see it. I can definitely see it. The Craftamo paper is quite bluish gray. And I've actually been in touch with them because I am working with them on brushes. You guys know I love their bamboo brushes. I'm coming out with my own line through them. So I have quite a close relationship with them, and they actually sent me that pad of paper and asked for feedback. So I did mention the color. The other thing about the paper was there's no like rip line. It doesn't come out of the pad as easily. So they're going to be looking into that. And they're fairly new to creating watercolor paper. So they did want some of that feedback. So I have used it, and I was pleasantly surprised with the bleeding and all that stuff. And you'll see once I actually kind of test it out again for you. But just keep in mind, this is a fairly new paper, so they are kind of working on perfecting it. And yeah, otherwise, all of them are quite similar in color, all the other ones. There's like some that are a little bit more creamy, some that are a little more bright white. That doesn't really matter too much to me. Texture-wise, they're all pretty similar. I'm noticing that the Stonehenge doesn't have as much texture to it, but my eye is kind of going to this Academy watercolor paper, and I feel like I have the highest hopes just based on the texture. It kind of looks interesting to me, so I'm excited to try that one. Anyway, let's start with our first and our smallest one, the Fabriano block. I've heard so many good things about Fabriano paper. I know they have a couple different types, so hopefully this one will work out. But I'm going to start by painting like a little rose on each paper because that's my go-to. I like to draw florals. That's what I use it for. So I want to see how it performs with that. So I'm going to start by taking some permanent rose, doing my thing. Washing some of that off. Let's see the bleeds. So far, so good. Soaks into the paper nicely. Let's do a little bit of wet on wet by taking a little bit more pigment. bleeds out nicely. I'm gonna take some green for a leaf. Make sure that we get a nice bleed there. And then let's try our lifting. Okay, it lifts. Let's try one of the more recent lifts. It's lighter. The lighter obviously lifts better. I'll do another little lift over here just to see. Let's do another little leaf here. Oops, I made a mistake. Let's lift it. Okay, and I'm gonna leave that there so we can compare to others. Let's get a little bit of darkness in there. It's staying wet. It's starting to dry over here a bit. It's not bad though. It's actually quite nice. I am noticing a bit of the texture underneath the paper, which might just be because it's still wet, but that's okay. Now I'm just gonna make a darker petal and then a lighter petal so I can layer another petal between them once they're dry to check out how well this paper does with layering. That was Fabriano. Let's do the same thing on Stonehenge. So I've had this paper before, like I said, and what I notice is that it doesn't soak in, the water and the pigment doesn't soak in as well as it does on other papers. It seems to sit on top a little bit more. That's just my opinion, and that's kind of why I'm getting these little marks here. Okay, I've had this problem with this paper in the past. I find it sits a bit more on top of the paper than soaking in. It's not bad, it's just not, like, I don't get a good feel from it. And that's just my personal opinion. Okay, let's do, whoop, I had too much water. That could have been my fault. Let's try again. We're lifting, huh? That lifts pretty well. Might also be the pink. Let's just do a little bit lighter, see if we can fix that mistake. This might be me. Let's try again. A little bit more green. There we go. The bleed is nice. But yeah, I feel like it doesn't soak in as well. It's good, but it just doesn't soak in as well. And it dries a little bit faster. A little bit faster. I find it sitting on top a bit more. Yeah. A light colored petal here. And then I want to layer. I'm making it darker. Let's do a dark one and then a light one. Okay, we're going to try and layer on top after it's dried at the end. Lift. Do a little lifting swatch. Okay, and we'll put it to the side. Okay, our next paper is our Paule Rubens block. So let's do the same thing. Never painted on this paper before. I tried the 50% cotton, which was not bad. It's soaking, yes, it's soaking into the paper a lot faster than the Stonehenge so far. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, okay? Because that means that like the paper's really holding on to that pigment and it will actually stay wet a lot longer and evenly when it soaks into the paper. Let's do a little bit of wet on wet. That's nice. I found it a lot harder to work on the Stonehenge for sure. I might even give another rose a little try just to see if it was just a fluke and just me. Because that happens too. I will admit that. So far, I love how evenly the paint spreads on this paper. This is nice. Let's grab a little bit of darker pigment, just need a little bit more water. Did I do that on, I didn't do that on the Stonehenge, my bad. We'll try it again after. Now it's not spreading out as much because it's not a spready outy color, if that makes sense. Some colors you'll notice kind of bleed out a lot more and some don't. I'm getting kind of those wet marks here. Those like little blooms, which is interesting. Oops, I'm gonna wash off my brush a bit more. Which means it could be drying unevenly. It seemed to dry here a lot faster. Okay, let's do lift test. So far, they're all lifting pretty decently. Gosh darn it, I forgot to do the petals. Okay. Dark petal. Lighter petal. Lighter petal. Okay. For layering after. All right. Now let's try the Craftamo. So it does seem to be sitting on top a little bit more. It's not soaking in as fast. Let's try a little bit of wet on wet. It is soaking in though, it's not sitting on top. And that is definitely a characteristic of 100% cotton paper. It soaks in faster. Let's grab some green. I find there's an interesting texture of the paper. Like it's very patterny. I don't know if you guys can see like this, it's almost like stripes, which I'm not a huge fan of, but let's see how it dries. Okay, let's lift. Wow, it looks like there's almost nothing there. Let's try a bit more pigment just to see. Okay, and then our two petals. Yeah, it sits on top of the paper a bit more than some of the other ones. Okay. Okay, now let's try the Canson Heritage paper. I feel like this paper is soaking in a bit more. It's not really sitting on top as much. Let's try a little bit of wet on wet. Look at how that spreads out. Interesting. It's nice. Just gonna Move it around. And I am trying my best to do the exact same thing on both. Obviously, depending on the paper, it's gonna work differently. So I might have to change up a couple things, but for the most part, I'm trying to do the exact same thing. All right, let's try our leaf. This actually feels pretty nice. I really like this paper so far. Okay, let's do our petal. Oh, and I gotta do my lift test. Okay, let's lift it. Maybe not as easy on that one. There we go. Okay, Academy watercolor paper. For some reason, this feels a little, like they're all 300 GSM, but just feels a little bit thicker. I have kind of high hopes for this just based on the way it looks and feels, but let's actually test it out. So far, I like the feel of this one too. Feels very similar to the Canson Heritage. It soaks in quite well. The bleeds are great. Look at that. Maybe a bit more, let's check. Okay, let's do our leaves. Oh, what am I doing? This is nice paper. This is very nice. I like this one too. Let's do our lift test. I feel like that's a bit darker than I usually do, but that's okay. Let's see. Let's try again with a little bit less pigment. Yeah, a little bit less pigment. Works a little better. Okay, and then our petals. Like that. Okay, that's pretty nice to work on too. I like that one. Okay, and last but not least, arches. You guys have seen me use this a bunch of times. I feel most comfortable with it. That's a lot of paint on my paper or on my brush. So I feel like this like Arches and the Academy watercolor paper and the Heritage watercolor paper all feel very similar in texture and the way they kind of work, which is probably why I like those two so far the best. Those other two, excuse me. It's all about like the texture, and that's just a preference of mine too. So, I mean, it might be totally different for what you like. There we go. Lift test. I might need to get a new paper towel. Let's try that again. I wonder if I just used too much paint, but there's that. All right, and then the petals. I think there's still a little green in my paintbrush. That's why it's pretty vibrant there. Okay, there we go. Now that all the petals are dry, I'm just gonna go and do a petal in the middle to layer them, and I will show you what they look like when they are all dry. So after looking at each painting, there were a couple more things I wanted to test out just so we had a bit more data to compare. So I wanted to do a flat kind of gradient wash for the background, a bit more lifting with some clouds, and some color bleeds with the grass bleeding into the sky. Okay, so now that they are all finished and dry, we can actually look and compare things. I have a couple things on my criteria that I was looking for, so let's get into it. First of all, vibrancy. I don't see much of a vibrancy issue with any of them. I think they're all fairly vibrant. The only one that I might say is a little less vibrant, which means it took the pigment not as well, might be the Craftamo, and I think that's because of the color of the paper. It's not a bright white, so the colors don't look as vibrant on it. Otherwise, I think everything else did really well in that category. The second one was paint absorption, and I think you guys heard me talk about it when I was doing like my first, impressions. Canson Heritage, Fabriano, Arches, and Academy, I think, were the best with the paint absorption. Paule Rubens actually wasn't bad either. I think it was just mostly these two where the water kind of just sat a little bit on top. Not as bad as Canson XL or like a cellulose paper. It's not like that. I still think that these are pretty decent papers, but compared to the others, the pigment and the water doesn't soak in as fast. And where you run into trouble with that is it gives more room for the paint and the water to pool. And that's when you kind of get these weird kind of lines like the blooms. It can happen on the other papers too. Don't get me wrong, it does happen. But there's more of a chance that it will happen on a paper where it tends to pool and sit on top. So that might be an issue and might be tricky for beginners. So the paint absorption for these 5 was pretty good. Okay, so the next thing I was looking at was the smoothness and the texture of the paper. I'm not a huge fan of like patterny textured watercolor paper. I like texture where like you feel it and you feel it's kind of rough, but I don't like it when it looks like it has like a pattern to it. You know what I mean? And the ones that I can mostly see that with, and it's not a deal breaker, it's not a make or break kind of issue, but when you can kind of see like this pattern, this watercolor paper pattern underneath, it's not my favorite thing. I noticed it a lot with the Canson Heritage. I notice it with this pattern kind of on the Craftamo. a bit on the Academy, which is fine, but I think I like the smoothness of Arches and actually the Paule Rubens, and the Fabriano's not bad. But I feel like, and what I mean, I don't mean texture, I mean like there's a pattern where you can kind of see it all, like the grain all kind of goes one way. It's not a problem, it's just like a preference thing, but that's totally up to you. People are gonna like different things, and that's totally okay. Okay, the next thing was the lifting ability. Now this one was a little bit tough because I found some, I don't know if I did it right, because some I might have used a bit more pigment than others, not meaning to. It's hard to get the exact same amount of pigment. I'm noticing on the Academy, Arches, a bit on the Stonehenge, didn't seem to lift as well with the leaves. But now let's look at the clouds. This is where why I kind of did the clouds. The ones that kind of look a bit more white lifted better. So Fabriano did really well. Canson Heritage did really well. Arches did really well. Academy did well. Stonehenge was okay. Craftamo wasn't the greatest, and the Paule Rubens wasn't the greatest for that. I use the same paint for each one. It really depends on the color too. Some have a bit more of like a staining property in it, so that's a thing to consider. But I was actually really impressed with the Fabriano and the Heritage. Like you can really see that white paper underneath, which is nice. So I really like that. And then lastly, which ones did I like and which ones did I not like? You know what? They're all great paper. It really depends on what you can get in your region for a decent price. So if you can find any of these in your region for a really good price, get it. They're not gonna, you know, they're gonna serve you well. That's all I can say. My favorite is definitely Arches still. I'm not like drawn to another one so much that I'm gonna give up Arches altogether. I also like things that I know. So Arches is definitely my favorite, but I really enjoy the Academy, the Canson, and Paule Rubens based on the way they performed. Also their size. The Fabriano I liked, but I think it's too expensive, and for the size that I was purchasing it at, it's just not for me. It performs really well, but it's just too expensive. So I did like these three. Very impressed with the Academy, I think especially. Stonehenge, again, for the price, it's just not as available to me, so it's super expensive. It took a long time to get to me. Just not for me. And then the Craftamo, because of the color, I think that is a huge factor, and the patterny bits underneath. I like it as practice paper, and I've actually used it a couple times in my tutorials. But as practice paper for cotton, I think is really good. So if you can get that for a cheap price, I would definitely suggest that. So there's my final thoughts, my rambling thoughts on all of these papers. I hope it was informative, and I hope you guys learned something. Please let me know in the comments below if there's any other papers that you've tried that I did not review here, that you really, really like, that, you know, maybe even cheaper or more available to certain regions. Let's help each other out in the comments. Let us know where you get your paper, and that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. I really hope you liked it, and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on Instagram for even more. Have a great day, guys. Bye.